linguist, a military spy, a quantum physicist, and witches. All must travel in time to bring back magic. Take the trip, too. Read The Rise and Fall of Dodo by master storyteller Nicole Galland and the best-selling author of Cryptonomicon, Neil Stephenson. Check out The Rise and Fall of Dodo, now at neilstephenson.com.
Welcome to the Futility Closet podcast, forgotten stories from the pages of history. Visit us online to sample more than 9,000 quirky curiosities, from a self-enumerating crossword to a fugitive doll. This is episode 158. I'm Greg Ross.
And I'm Sharon Ross. Belle Gunness was one of America's most prolific female serial killers, luring lonely men to her Indiana farm with promises of marriage, only to rob and kill them. In today's show, we'll tell the story of the LaPorte Black Widow and learn about some of her unfortunate victims. We'll also break into Buckingham Palace and puzzle over a bet with the devil.
Early in the morning of April 27, 1908, a fire broke out in a farmhouse outside LaPorte, Indiana, 60 miles east of Chicago. The house belonged to Belle Gunness, a 48-year-old Norwegian immigrant who lived there with 3 children. The townspeople raced to fight the fire, but it was raging before they got there, and it soon consumed the whole house. Afterward, as they searched for victims, the authorities found 4 bodies in the cellar. 3 appeared to be those of the children, whose ages were 11, 9, and 5, and the 4th was that of a woman. But there were 2 odd things about the woman's body. For one thing, it seemed much smaller than Belle Gunness, and for another, it was lacking a head. Gunness had moved to Indiana from Chicago, where it appeared she had overcome a series of misfortunes. 2 of her 4 children had died of a mysterious illness, and the confectioner's shop that she ran with her first husband, Mott's, had burned down in 1898. With admirable foresight, though, Belle had insured the shop personally, so they avoided a financial calamity. 3 years later, Mott's himself died of a mysterious illness, but again, good planning seems to have saved her. Mott's died on the one day when his 2 life insurance policies overlapped, so that when Belle grieved his loss, she had $8,500 to console her. In 1901, she moved to LaPorte and bought the farm about a mile northwest of town, and the following year she married a new man, Peter Gunness, who brought along his own children. Tragically, misfortune struck again. His infant daughter died a week after the wedding while alone with her new mother, and within 8 months, Peter himself died in a freak accident. Somehow a sausage grinder and a crock of hot brine fell onto his head at the same time. Fortunately, Belle had insured Peter too, and she received $3,500 for his death. Now in her 40s and raising 3 young children, Belle began placing matrimonial ads in Scandinavian-language newspapers published in America. She described herself as stout and womanly, which was a bit of an understatement. It was said she could lift a 100-pound hog under each arm. She said she was seeking a Norwegian man of means to share the farm with her, and she required that he put cash down. Her mailman said she wrote 8 to 10 of these letters a day and received as many in return, and he said she got cranky when none arrived. In time, men began arriving at the farm from across the upper Midwest. The neighbors found their behavior odd. They'd be seen on the farm or in town, but abruptly they would disappear, and Belle's explanations for this seemed strange. In 1904, she told one inquiring neighbor that one man had left in the middle of plowing season to visit the St. Louis World's Fair. And the neighbors also noticed that when the men departed, they tended to leave their possessions behind, trunks, watches, and clothing, and never returned to retrieve them. After the fire in early May, a man named Asli Helgeland arrived in town. Asli was a homesteading farmer from South Dakota, and he'd come to look for his brother, Andrew, who had been corresponding with Belle and had come for a week-long visit in January. He'd never returned home. Asli had written to Belle about this, but she had said that Andrew had simply gone away. That seemed unlikely. In Andrew's house, Asli had found 80 letters that Belle had written to his brother, and after hearing about the fire, he came to investigate for himself. When he arrived, he found farmhands digging near the ruins of the Gunness house, searching for the missing head of the woman victim. One farmhand, Joe Maxson, told Asli that Belle had sometimes told him to dig holes on the property that she would later fill in. Asli urged them to extend their search to the surrounding land, and to his horror, they soon found the dismembered body of his brother Andrew, as well as the bodies of many other people. How many is uncertain. Stories claim that as many as 40 bodies were found, but more conservative researchers say 11 to 14. Although it's possible that some were never found. 2 of the bodies were identified as Andrew Helgeland and Ulla Budsberg of Iola, Wisconsin. There were also 8 unknowns, 4 adults of unknown sex, 1 woman, 1 man, 1 adult or adolescent male, and 1 adolescent of unknown sex. Many of the bodies were men, presumably those of the suitors who had mysteriously disappeared on the farm. They also found the remains of Jenny Olson, a blonde teenager whom Belle had raised since infancy. That was a surprise. Belle had told neighbors in late 1906 that Jenny had gone to college, and more recently that she was on her wedding trip. LaPorte was thronged with curiosity seekers as people flocked to Belle's out-of-the-way farm, and newspapermen filed 100,000 words a day from the town. Police arrested Belle's former hired hand, a man named Ray Lamphere, on suspicion that he'd started the fire. Initially, he denied being near the house that night, but a rather self-possessed 16-year-old named John Soliam confronted him and said, "You found me hiding behind a bush and told me you'd kill me if I didn't get out of there." Lamphere admitted to being Gunness's lover, but he said that they'd had a falling out in recent months. In the 6 weeks before the fire, she'd initiated 4 legal actions against him, one for trespassing, what was called a peace bond, which I gather is like a restraining order, and one attempt to have him declared insane. So there'd been a massive falling out between them. Lamphere was tried in November 1908. He was convicted of arson for burning the house, but he was acquitted of murder because it turned out that the 4 bodies found in the burned-out cellar had not been killed by the fire. Their stomachs contained arsenic and strychnine. And there remained the puzzle of the woman victim's size. Belle had stood 5'7" and weighed 200 pounds. The woman in the cellar, allowing for the missing head and neck, was probably 5'3" and weighed about 150. Some witnesses said they had seen Belle driving a slight brunette woman to the house on the Saturday before the fire. That suggested a plot. Perhaps Belle had found a double for herself, hired her for some task on the farm, then poisoned her, removed her head to prevent identification, put her in the cellar with the dead children, and set fire to the house. A search of the cellar had turned up a pair of dentures, and a dentist identified these as belonging to Belle, but she could have planted those to convince investigators that the headless body was hers. Ray Lamphere went to prison, and he died there a year later of tuberculosis. As his health got worse, the state's attorney and prison officials questioned him repeatedly. He said he knew nothing that might shed further light on the murders, but he told a fellow inmate that Belle had drugged the men's coffee, bashed their heads in, and cut them up. Then he said, "I did the planting." As the evidence came in, it supported the idea that Belle had faked her own death and fled the farm. Investigators found that on the day before the fire, she'd kept her children home from school and gone into town, where she'd written a will and withdrawn most of the money from her bank account. She'd also bought a lot of kerosene. That raises the question why she chose this moment to flee instead of another one. Apparently she'd been doing this for years. One theory is that Ray Lamphere had participated willingly in the early murders, but had then become jealous of Andrea Helgeland, the last known victim, and had begun to fight with Belle about this. At that point, she would have had to worry that he might report the murders, and to compound her worry, in the spring of 1908, Asli Helgeland began sending her probing letters asking after his missing brother. If she had fled, no one knew where she'd gone. In the years that followed, she appeared intermittently like a ghost in reported sightings all around the country. Eventually, people wrote to LaPorte from all 48 states claiming to have seen Belle Gunness. The most notorious of these claims came from Los Angeles more than 20 years later, in 1931. A housekeeper named Esther Carlson was tried for poisoning her employer to get $2,000 that he'd held in a bank account with her. Carlson gave her age as 61, which was about 10 years younger than Belle would have been at that time. But the two shared a physical resemblance, and both of them were suspected of killing by poison. Carlson denied that she was Belle Gunness and cited a work history in Connecticut as proof. She died of tuberculosis before her trial began, but authorities tracked down 2 former LaPorte residents who were now living in Los Angeles and asked them to view the remains, and they both swore the dead woman was Belle Gunness. In Esther Carlson's trunk, investigators found pictures of 3 children. Another former LaPorte resident was asked to view these and identified them as the 3 children who had died in the fire. Around the anniversary of this case, in 2008, some modern investigators looked into it again. One of them is Andrea Simmons, a LaPorte native and lawyer who was working on a master's degree in forensic anthropology. Simmons concluded that Gunness probably killed at least 25 people, starting in Chicago, where she poisoned her first husband, Mats Sorensen, and possibly 2 of their children, who at the time had been diagnosed with acute colitis. In LaPorte, it appears she killed her second husband, 5 children, and an unknown number of suitors. As I said, a conservative figure is 11. And then possibly she killed a woman to stand in for her own corpse as she escaped to Los Angeles, whereas Esther Carlson, she may have killed at least one other person. In 2007, Simmons led a team from the University of Indianapolis that exhumed the corpse that had been found in the farmhouse cellar, hoping to match its DNA to a sample they'd collected from an envelope that Belle Gunness had sent to one suitor. This would have shown for certain that Gunness had not died in the fire. Unfortunately, the DNA sample was too degraded to use. A descendant of Belle's grandmother from Norway offered her DNA, but there wasn't enough money to get the samples examined. So there's no clear result there.
What I don't really understand is how you could think it would have been Belle, like, because how would she have cut off her own head? Unless it was like her disgruntled lover had cut off her head. But
it seems like a very safe bet that the whole thing was contrived to make it look like she died in a fire. But we just can't say that with absolute certainty.
But then that seems careless of her to have not included the head, because if you were missing the head of the person couldn't have died in a fire if their head isn't there.
Yeah, I guess I don't know enough about forensics in 1908. Maybe she thought dental records would give it away. I don't know. No one ever found the head.
They never found that. Okay, so that's even stranger.
Yeah. But I think you're right. It seems pretty clear that she got away, but the question is what happened to her. Whatever became of Belle, it seems clear that she spent years writing romantic letters to lure men to her Indiana farm, then collecting their money and killing them. News accounts called her the Lady Bluebeard, the American Siren, the LaPorte Black Widow, and Hell's Belle. In 1990, Ted Hartzell, a reporter for the LaPorte Herald-Argus, got his hands on 11 of the letters that she'd sent to her suitors. Cullen Thompson, who translated them out of Norwegian, said, "Her diction, spelling, composition, and penmanship are shockingly poor. Her letters to Andrea Helgeland are literally too bad to be believed." Thompson said she seemed to have dashed the letters off hastily. He compared her writing to that of a modern second grader. But somehow she knew how to appeal to lonely immigrants who missed their old lives in Norway. In his testimony at the Lanfear trial, Asli Helgeland recalled his brother Andrew. He said, "He lived too much in imagination for a farmer in Dakota. He could not forget the fjords and mountains of his nativity. Anything that brought a touch of home with it moved him to melancholy. When the Gunness woman began to write him letters, he was fascinated. She was a clever woman. She wrote of the things he loved. She discussed Norwegian places and Norwegian ways. And she told him she loved him, and he believed it, because the poor fellow was in that mood where he would have renounced richness in America for a crust at home. The widow held him spellbound. He loved her for her letters. Of her personality he had doubts, I know that, but still he could not believe she was as he had been told. So he went to his death." Andrea Helgeland corresponded with Belle for a year and a half before coming to LaPorte. She urged him constantly to sell all his property, get cash, sew it into his underclothes, and come to her, telling no one. In a 1906 letter, she wrote, "My dear friend, have all the money changed into bills in as large a denomination as possible, and sew them real good, first on the inside of your underwear, and put a thin piece of cloth under, so it would not be noticed, and sew it good. Do not say one word about it to anyone, not even your nearest relative." She had written to Andrea Helgeland, "I do not think you will leave me after you have first come here, that I am sure of." Asli wrote to his siblings in Norway. She lived in a very fashionable house, and all she had was fine, and this was what deceived Andrew. Nobody could think that a woman could be so false-hearted and manage this murdering so long time near the town border without the authorities knowing anything. But she went regularly to church, and she had everything fine and great. Ulla Budsberg left his home in Iola, Wisconsin in April 1907 with a $3,000 bank draft to marry Belle. When his sons failed to hear from him, she told them that he'd gone to Oregon to buy a farm. Then, apparently to cover her tracks, she sent a letter to his home in Iowa, innocently asking what had become of him and saying that she was still willing to marry him. Other suitors included Herman Konigsberg of Chicago, George Berry of Tuscola, Illinois, Charles Ermund of Newcastle, Pennsylvania, and Henry Gerhardt of Scandinavia, Wisconsin. All of them visited Belle. None of them were ever seen again. Each gave her between $300,000 and $23,000. Only one suitor got away that we know of. That was George Anderson of Tarkio, Missouri. When he arrived at the farm, Belle said she needed more money to pay off the mortgage before she could marry him. He wired home for more funds, but on his third night at the house, he woke from a bad dream to find her leaning over his bed and peering into his face. He cried out, she ran away, and he fled the house. But Andrea Simmons, the modern investigator, said, "She was good, she was very good." Most of the men probably did not last the night.
Jeff and Andy are two ordinary guys who were fed up with getting ripped off when buying razors, so they started Harry's to fix shaving. They bought their own blade factory to ensure quality, and now by taking less profit and selling directly to you over the internet, Harry's offers their blades at half the price. So that's just $2 a blade compared to the $4 or more you'll pay at the drugstore.
Harry's has sent me some of the razors to try, and I do like their quality. Their blades really do give a smooth, comfortable shave, and the convenience is great. They ship them right to your door.
Harry's is so confident you'll love their blades, they're giving you their trial set for free. Just cover $3 shipping. Your free trial set includes a weighted ergonomic razor handle, 5 precision-engineered blades with a lubricating strip and trimmer blade, rich lathering shave gel, and a travel blade cover. That's a $13 value for you to try.
Get started shaving with Harry's today by claiming your free trial offer, a $13 value for free. You just cover shipping. To get your free trial set, including a razor handle, a 5-blade cartridge, and shave gel, go to harrys.com/closet right now. That's harrys.com/closet.
In episode 153, Greg told us about Tom Jones, a London teenager who had repeatedly broken into Queen Victoria's Buckingham Palace. Tom Rosati wrote to us, "Hello, Sharon, Greg, and Sasha. Tom from Brooklyn here. Love the podcast and have been waiting for an excuse to write in. The Buckingham Palace break-ins mentioned in episode 153 reminded me of a similar story that happened in 1982, where an unemployed decorator named Michael Fagan broke into Buckingham Palace, wandered around, ate some food, drank some wine, and startled the Queen. This was in some ways amusing, but in some ways a bit alarming event where the 32-year-old Fagan ended up in Queen Elizabeth II's bedroom in the early morning of July 9, 1982. Fagan had scaled a 14-foot wall topped with barbed wire and revolving spikes, climbed up a drain pipe to a flat roof, removed his shoes and socks to get across a narrow ledge, and entered an unlocked window into an office. He then wandered through the halls of the palace for 15 minutes or so until he found the Queen's private apartments. In an anteroom, he broke a glass ashtray into several pieces and entered Her Majesty's bedroom at about 7:15 a.m. carrying one of these glass pieces. He later claimed that after seeing the ashtray, he got the idea of slashing his wrists in the presence of the Queen. Fagan apparently woke the Queen by opening some curtains near her bed, and I would think that this whole event must have been rather unnerving for her as she didn't know what his intentions might be.
That sounds terrifying, the whole thing.
I know. On being awoken, she pressed a night alarm bell, which no one answered. She then used a bedside phone to tell the palace telephone operator to summon help, and then had to call again when still no one arrived. I just can't imagine what might have been going through her head.
It sounds like a dream.
Before the police got there, the Queen had managed to attract the attention of a maid who got Fagan into a nearby pantry on the pretext of getting him a cigarette. A footman who had been exercising the dogs showed up, and while the Queen tried to keep the dogs away from Fagan, who was starting to act agitated, the footman kept him in the pantry by giving him more cigarettes until the police finally arrived. An article that appeared in The Guardian soon after this incident notes that Fagan was reported to have made at least 12 visits to the palace, telling his wife that he was going to see his girlfriend, Elizabeth Regina, or basically Elizabeth the Queen. Apparently, Fagan's mother spoke of her son's girlfriend called Elizabeth and said that Fagan had said she had 4 children like him but was a bit older than he was. Queen Elizabeth has 4 children. Fagan's father called his son a royal fanatic and said, "He was a very happy-go-lucky person, and I think he would have put the Queen at ease straight away. He could smooth talk anyone." I somehow don't imagine that the Queen actually would have felt at her ease at any point during the incident, but it did sound to me like she did handle it with considerable presence of mind.
Yeah, considering that would be the last thing you'd expect if you were the Queen.
Yeah. In the year or so before this particular event, there had been several other incidents reflecting poor security at Buckingham Palace, including one where Fagan himself had entered the palace on June 7th, spent most of the night inside, and drank half a bottle of wine. Until they had caught him on July 9th, the police hadn't had any way of identifying who that intruder had been. But after the July 9th incident, the opposition spokesman, Roy Hattersley, asked about the additional security that had been introduced at the palace over the previous several months, saying, "Since that resulted in a man getting into the Queen's bedroom, how bad was it before the improvement?" And it had surprised us some that it wasn't considered a criminal offense for Tom Jones to have broken into Buckingham Palace in the 1840s. But even more surprising, it still wasn't a criminal offense when Michael Fagan did it in the 1980s. So he wasn't charged with trespassing in the Queen's bedroom, though he was initially charged with the theft of the wine on his previous entry, until those charges were dropped when he was committed for psychiatric evaluation. And apparently it wasn't until 2007 that it became a criminal offense to trespass in the palace or on its grounds.
But it's possible that if they hadn't put him in for a psychiatric evaluation, he might have been charged only with stealing wine.
Yes, and he had stolen the wine the previous visit, so apparently they didn't charge him anything for showing up in the Queen's bedroom with a broken piece of glass in his hand. Like, he wasn't charged with anything for that.
It's funny, too, another parallel with the Jones case is that they both put a lot of effort into getting into the palace, but once they were there, it was sort of wandered around aimlessly, not quite sure what to do. It's a strange thing.
Yeah. I just thought it was really weird that he sort of saw the queen as his girlfriend, or at least represented her that way to other people.
Yeah.
Okay, and now I will warn you that I'm going to update some puzzles, and this is in case you don't want to have any puzzle solutions spoiled for you. Also in episode 153, Greg had given me a puzzle about a contributor to a musical album that had never set foot on Earth. James Cooper, who has a delightfully easy name for me to pronounce, but still nicely sent in a tip for getting it right, just to show he's been listening, wrote and said, I was listening to episode 153 this morning and realized an alternative answer to the lateral thinking puzzle. Not knowing about the Lennon Ono recording, I really thought Greg was going to reveal the answer to be the newborn baby on Stevie Wonder's Isn't She Lovely, as I'm sure the child didn't set foot on Earth by the time of the recording. Isn't She Lovely is a song by Stevie Wonder on his 1976 album Songs in the Key of Life. And in the song, he celebrates the birth of his daughter Aisha, and the song starts with the sound of a baby crying, at least on the album. Greg and I knew the song, but weren't familiar with the crying part, as that wasn't included on the radio version of the song. So I guess I would have had as much trouble guessing this answer as I did the Lennon answer, since I didn't know about Lennon using his baby's heartbeat on his song.
He's right, though. Aisha wouldn't have set foot on Earth
when
that was recorded.
It is a good alternative answer. Tim Ellis and Kevin Colt both wrote in with the same alternative answer to the puzzle from episode 154, where a couple comes across some dead bodies lying on the ground, and not only do the police not investigate, but they just leave the bodies where they are. Kevin actually had the fun idea that I should give the puzzle to Greg again with the exact same setup, but make him guess a totally different answer. Unfortunately, Greg had seen Tim's email before Kevin's came in, so we couldn't try that out, but it would have been fun to see how he would have handled it. Kevin said of his new version of the puzzle, "Yep, dead people. At this point, it's a tradition," and gave us his answer. The couple had strayed onto a forensic body farm, a research facility where anthropologists and other scientists study decomposition using actual corpses. There are currently 6 such facilities in the U.S., with the largest in Texas at 26 acres. Such areas are typically surrounded by privacy fencing and razor wire, but it's not unthinkable to imagine that someone adventurous could stray in by mistake. Thank you again for the podcast. Supporting the Patreon is some of my best spent money each month. And thank you, Kevin. And Greg and I hadn't heard of body farms before, but they do make a great lateral thinking puzzle answer, as they are full of dead people. They are forensic research facilities that aim to provide a better understanding of human decomposition in various conditions, such as in a car trunk versus a shallow grave versus in water, and so on. Prior to the development of the first body farm in 1981, pig remains were commonly used as a stand-in for humans, but obviously there are a variety of differences between humans and pigs. The first body farm was started at the University of Tennessee and was the only one in existence for about 25 years. But the information gained was so useful to anthropologists and law enforcement that 5 others were started in the U.S., and 1 opened in Australia near Sydney in 2016. Since decomposition can vary significantly in different climates, there are efforts to open research facilities in other countries, such as the UK, where currently they are having to rely on research conducted in different conditions or are still using pigs or other animals. So there you go. You can now make one lateral thinking puzzle do double duty and give it to your friends or family twice and make them guess 2 different answers. And I would think that would be even harder to do than just having to guess the first answer, because now you might have that answer stuck in your head and you have to come up with
trying to guess the second
yet another completely different one. Yeah, so that would be challenging. So thanks so much to everyone who writes into us. And yes, I do still appreciate it when you let me know how to pronounce your name. If anyone has ever managed to say your name incorrectly, then please do me a favor and give me some tips on getting it right when you write into us at podcast@futilitycloset.com. It's Greg's turn to try to solve a lateral thinking puzzle. I'm going to give him an intriguing situation, and he has to figure out what's going on, asking only yes or no questions. This puzzle comes from Frank Kroger, who said, if the puzzle actually makes it on the show, you can pronounce my name any way you want.
Oh, good.
And suggest that I try channeling any of the German actors from the TV show Hogan's Heroes. So, sorry, I didn't really watch that show very much, so might not have gotten that German enough sounding. But Frank's puzzle was based on a children's book, a German children's book that in English would be Tim Thaler or The Traded Laughter.
Right.
And this tells the story of a boy who trades his laughter to the devil in exchange for the ability to win any bet he makes. Okay, you got that so far?
Good story.
There are two stipulations. If Tim places a bet and doesn't win, the contract automatically becomes void and he gets his laughter back.
All right.
If he tells anybody about the deal, he'll lose his laughter forever and will no longer win any bet.
Okay.
Okay?
Got it.
After a while, Tim realizes that he misses his laughter and wants it back, but he has no idea how to go about doing that. Eventually, he meets a particular person and realizes that now he has a way to get his laughter back, provided that the devil keeps to his word. What was Tim's solution?
That's a great puzzle. That's great. I don't know if I'll be able to solve it, but I really like it. Okay. So the two rules were, if he tells anybody about this,
right,
he loses
his laughter forever and will no longer win any bets.
Right, okay.
And the other rule was if he places a bet and doesn't win, the contract becomes void and he gets his laughter back.
Okay, that sounds like that's the key. If he places a bet and doesn't win, he'll get what he wants here.
Yeah, he gets his laughter back.
You say he meets someone.
That's true. Yes, that's critical for the solution. He meets a particular person.
Not just anyone.
Right, a particular person, yes.
Okay, because it sounded like we were headed towards some clever logic puzzle where it would work with anyone.
Yeah, it's sort of a kind of a logic puzzle, but you need a particular person. Yes.
Okay.
To make this work.
Okay. All right. So the rule was if he places a bet and... So I'm sorry, say it again. The first rule.
If he places a bet and doesn't win, the contract automatically becomes void and he gets his laughter back.
Okay. So he wants to place a bet that he doesn't win.
Yeah.
But the bet can be about anything. It doesn't have to be about this deal.
Well, right. In the contract, the bet can be about anything.
Okay. So he just needs to place a bet that he loses.
Yeah.
All right. So let's figure out who he meets. Is it a relative of his?
No.
Is it someone who's related in any way to the devil?
No.
Is the person's occupation important?
No.
Is his relationship to the person important? I mean, does he know them already? He hasn't met them before.
He doesn't know them.
Okay, so but he places a bet. He makes a bet with this person.
Yes.
And loses it, I'm guessing.
Well, it's even before that. Even before he loses it, that
he gets his laughter back?
That he would have to. I'm trying to think how to say anything.
Okay, no, don't.
Yeah,
okay, so he meets someone and makes a bet with that person.
Yes.
And in the end, he has his laughter back.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's a good way to say it.
But you're sort of hedging around the idea that it's the bet that fulfills the first rule of the contract.
It is the bet. It is something about the bet, but it's also, this would only work with a very particular person.
Okay, no, I understand that, but I'm just trying to think.
Yeah, but it is the bet. They had to make a bet.
And he lost the bet.
Well, that's what I'm saying. You don't even have to get that far. It's as soon as the bet is placed.
He gets his laughter back.
He would have to, yeah.
Okay, what was the second rule again, just so I have it?
If he tells anybody about the deal, he'll lose his laughter forever. So he can't
just explain, I need to do this.
Right, exactly.
Please let me lose the bet. Okay. So, just to square that away, he doesn't tell anyone at any point about the bet?
He does not. That's correct.
Okay, so we're done with the second rule.
Right, yes, you don't have to worry about that. Right, so it just means he can't collaborate with somebody and work collaboratively with them.
Okay, so it sounds like what we're zeroing in on is that he finds a way to conceive a bet that he must lose. Not
exactly. He doesn't even...
You see what I'm saying? If you could think of some bet that just even in principle he's bound to lose.
I see.
He doesn't even have to place it.
That's
he can just
true.
present that to the devil
and I
get what he
suppose
wants.
you could come up with various, bets that you just can't possibly win. Right. But that's not what happens.
But that's not it.
That's not what happens. Right. He doesn't even propose the bet specifically. The other person does.
The other person proposes a bet that he loses.
That he's going to lose.
And the other person doesn't know about this whole contract.
Right.
Because they haven't been told about it.
Right.
Okay.
But there's something specific about this other person that's really important.
Okay. And they're not related to him or to the devil. Is this person's gender important?
No.
Or age?
No.
You said occupation isn't.
Correct.
Okay, so it sounds like you have to figure out exactly what the bet was.
Yes.
Is it something reflexive about the bet concerns a contract or, you know what I mean?
No.
Is it a bet about some future event? Like they're wagering over whether something will happen?
Sort of, but not like an independent future event that you have, that has nothing to do with the two of you, like who's going to win an election.
Right, it's not like that.
Not like that.
Is it about, laughter, about something
Yes.
we've already been talking about?
Yes.
All right. So he meets someone who I
Yes.
understand I still haven't figured out who that is.
Right.
That person proposes a bet.
Yeah, you don't need to know that person's specific identity, but there is something about that person that you need to know, but it's not like their specific identity.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That
okay.
person proposes a
proposes
bet,
a wager,
yeah.
something to do with laughter.
Yeah.
The guy, what's the name guy?
Tim?
Tim accepts this bet
Yes.
and loses it.
Well, won't be, yeah.
Or would lose it.
Right.
And thus gets his laughter back.
Right, and so the contract would have to be broken.
So all I got to figure out then is what bet could be placed that he would lose.
Yes, and it has to do with laughter.
Well, is it about whether he will laugh?
Yeah. And then what's the particular characteristic for the person placing the bet who believes he's going to win? One, because he's noticed that Tim never laughs. So the bet is, I bet I can't make you laugh, right? Okay, but then there's something else. There's
beyond that?
Yeah, there's one other particular stipulation that this man has a particular history, that something particular has happened to him too.
Oh, is it that the devil has made the same contract with him?
Yeah, so he believes he's going to win all bets, right?
Oh, that's clever.
So now you have two people who each have a deal with the devil that they're always going to win their bet, right?
Yeah.
And he bets Tim, I bet that you can't laugh. And if Tim can't lose the bet, right? But in order to win the bet, he has to be able to laugh. So the contract becomes void.
That's really good.
And Tim gets his laughter back.
Is that what happens in the story? I mean, that's the whole
what
thing?
Tim says, that the novel suggests that that's what the devil would have to refuse to fulfill the contract, in which case the contract becomes void. Because Frank says that the only other thing that could happen is that Tim would win the bet and get his laughter back and keep winning bets. So the best thing for the devil to do would be to not fulfill the contract and let it just become void.
I really like that.
So thanks to Frank for that puzzle. And if anyone else has one they'd like to send in for us to try, please send it to us at podcast@futilitycloset.com. That's our show for today. If you're looking for more quirky curiosities, check out the Futility Closet books on Amazon or visit the website at futilitycloset.com, where you can sample more than 9,000 extraneous bagatelles. At the website, you can also see the show notes for the podcast with links and references for the topics in today's show. If you like our podcast and want to help support it, please check out our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/futilitycloset or see the support us page of the website. You can also help us out by telling your friends about us or by leaving a review on your favorite podcast directory. If you have any questions or comments about the show, you can reach us by email at podcast@futilitycloset.com. Our music was written and performed by Doug Ross. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.